Wildlife. The term wildlife refers to the natural form, that is, plant life, for example, forests and grasslands, and fauna, that is, animals' life such as mammals, reptiles, birds and insects, leaving their natural habitats such as forests, grasslands, seas, lakes and rivers. Factors that influence the distribution of wildlife in East Africa. There are various factors that influence the distribution of wildlife in East Africa: climate, relief type, soil type, vegetation, and drainage. Climate. The main elements of climate that influence distribution of wildlife are temperature variation and rainfall distribution. Soil type. Various soil types support different types of vegetation. Relief or terrain. The height of the land varies, hence results in altitudinal distribution of vegetation. Vegetation. Various vegetation types are habitats for different animals. For example, forests are inhabited by elephants, wild savanna grassland are inhabited by a variety of herbivorous animals. Drainage. Well-drained areas support a wide variety of plants and animals. A game reserve is a place set aside for wildlife conservation, managed by county councils or local authorities. There is limited human activities in the reserves, such as grazing of domestic animals. Location of national parks, major game reserves, and sanctuaries in East Africa. Wildlife is of great significance to people in many ways. For example, wildlife is a natural beauty, thereby attracting tourists, which makes the country to earn both foreign exchange and income. Tourism industry associated with the wildlife employs people both in hotels and tour farms. Wildlife sector employs game wardens and forest guards to manage the game parks and reserves. The employed people earn income, thereby raising the standard of living. Wildlife provides scientists with a field in which they can study. Students also visit such areas to carry out such studies or familiarize themselves with different animals and plants. Wildlife provides food for consumption, for example, meat from animals, fruits, honey and leaves. Forest vegetation helps in conservation of the environment through air purification, hydrological cycle and prevention of soil erosion. Wildlife is a source of raw materials such as timber products from forests, animal skins used to make leather products. Trees provide a cheap source of energy for domestic and industrial use such as charcoal and wood. Problems facing wildlife in East Africa. The following are the problems facing wildlife in East Africa: poaching, encroaching of reserved areas, overexploitation of water resources, industrial waste, forest fires, natural calamities, wild animals, inadequate capital, human conflicts, and pests and diseases. Poaching. Poaching is unlicensed and uncontrolled killing of wild animals for the purpose of getting hides, skins, horns, ivory, or meat. Illegal killing of wild animals has rapidly reduced their population. For example, rhino in Kenya, which almost suffered extinction. Increase of population has led to encroaching of reserved areas to create room for settlement, agriculture, and industries. This has led to destruction of tree species and habitat for wild animals, leading to migration and death of some of the animals. Overexploitation of water resources through sport, fishing and commercial catching of fish, crustaceans, and collection of seaweeds by human beings has gradually reduced the number of marine life in many lakes and rivers in East Africa, for example, overfishing in Lake Victoria. Dumping of industrial waste in water bodies such as rivers and lakes, which shelter wildlife, has contributed to the death of many wild animals, and the remaining migrate to safer grounds. For example, Lake Nakuru has been polluted by industrial waste from the surrounding industries, which has contributed to death of many flamingos, and many others migrated to other lakes such as Lake Bogoria. Forest fires or bushfires started by poachers, smokers, charcoal burners, etc. destroy large areas under vegetation. This leads to death of animals and migrations due to food shortage. Natural calamities. Natural calamities such as drought and floods lead to mass destruction of vegetation and wild animals. Wild animals destroy their habitat by overgrazing, especially where there is high population of grazers such as gazelles and browsers such as giraffes. East African countries have inadequate capital, hence are not able to carry out adequate conservation of wildlife and to develop transportation system within the park or reserves. Human conflicts affect wildlife negatively. Thousands of animals in the Rwenzori Mountains National Park in Uganda were killed by the invading Tanzanian army, which was out to remove President Idi Amin from power in 1979. Pests and diseases are a major threat to wildlife. Feline immune deficiency, FIV, the cat's version of HIV, threatens to reduce the lion's population in East Africa. Management and conservation of wildlife in East Africa. Management of wildlife refers to careful planning and control of wildlife resources. Conservation of wildlife refers to the protection of wildlife resources for the future generation. Some of the management measures include formation of wildlife management bodies, training and research, and creating public awareness and education. The 3 East African governments have established organizations responsible for management and conservation of wildlife, namely KWS, which is Kenya Wildlife Services, UWA, which is Uganda Wildlife Authority, and TAZANA, which is Tanzania National Parks Authority. The East African countries have established exclusive wildlife colleges. For example, the College of African Wildlife Management at Mweka in Tanzania. The Kenya Wildlife Services engages in research on conservation issues in all parks and reserves. Creating public awareness and education through concerned efforts among the youth in the need to manage and conserve wildlife. This is done through wildlife clubs in schools, wildlife conservation education centers at Nairobi National Park, Tsavo National Park, and Lake Nakuru National Park. Public awareness on management and conservation is also being done through the media, posters, seminars, and meetings. Other methods of wildlife management include translocation. This involves the movement of animals from one area to another area of similar ecological characteristics so as to reduce pressure of species if they exceed the carrying capacity of the area. Culling. This involves killing of older and sick animals so as to reduce the numbers and give room for the younger ones. The conservation measures undertaken include establishment of game reserves, national parks and game sanctuaries, establishment of anti-poaching unit, ban on game hunting and trading in game products, establishing of game ranches, fencing of forest and national parks, non-governmental organization initiatives, gazettement of forests, ecotourism and pollution control, rehabilitation if land is damaged by mining and soil erosion, and research. Establishment of game reserves. Establishment of game reserves, national parks and game sanctuaries. Land has been set aside for the above and gazetted to enjoy government protection against destruction by people. For example, Kenya has 23 national parks, 4 marine parks, 6 marine reserves, 28 national reserves, and 5 national sanctuaries, occupying a total of 47,674 squared kilometers. Establishment of anti-poaching units. The government has set aside anti-poaching units which are manned by well-trained paramilitary personnel with the responsibility of tracking down and arresting poachers. Ban on game hunting and trading in game products. In East Africa, the hunting of wild game is prohibited so as to allow for their population increase. In 1978, trade of all wildlife products was banned in Kenya. Examples of such products are the rhinoceros horns, hippopotamus teeth, elephant tusks, crocodiles, leopard, lion, and zebra skins. The fencing of forests and national parks. Forest reserves, national parks, and sanctuaries are fenced off so as to limit human interference. Non-governmental organizations' initiatives. The organizations have played key roles in the conservation of wildlife in the East African region. For example, the World Wildlife Fund (WWF), which has given support to the Lake Nakuru National Park in Kenya. Other organizations are National Save the Rhino Project, Kenya Rhino Rescue Project, and Conservation Strategy and Management Plan for the Black Rhinoceros. The Youth for Conservation is also an NGO which conducts regular desnaring in major national parks in Kenya, besides conducting public awareness programs. Ecotourism and population control. Ecotourism is an environment-friendly tourism whereby a tourist enjoys watching what nature has provided for enjoyment, while at the same time protects what nature has provided. Ecotourism enhances conservation of the wildlife through reduced construction of facilities such as lodges, roads, and airstrips into parks. Through ecotourism, proceeds from tourism are shared with the local communities, hence encouraging them to conserve wildlife, for example, the Mwaluganje Elephant Sanctuary in Kwale.